Hey there, it's John Bird 555. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger, and I am continuing my series of Mash Retro reviews with Season 3, Episode 10, There Is Nothing Like a Nurse. So the premise of this episode is that the 477 is expecting an enemy attack, so the nurses are evacuated. All the men get to stay. Such sexist thing. But that's actually a very historic attitude. For most of military history, anytime there were women attached to a military unit in some form, whether that be as camp followers, nurses, generally the idea was that if you know they're going to be attacked, you send the women away. Now, did that always happen? No. There's plenty of episodes where they get under attack and the nurses are still there. It's reality, and the reality is what the men in charge want does not always happen. And also too, this episode shows that most of the people outside the doctors at the 477 have no clue about medical stuff, because there's a scene where they're helping in the OR because they have wounded come in but no nurses. And yeah, most of them they don't know what to do, how to hand instruments and all that. But I got to say, there was that episode in, I want to say it was season 1, where everyone in the camp comes down with the flu except for Hawkeye and Margaret. So a lot of non-medical personnel are tapped to help with nursing duties and all that, and Margaret's tapped to help with more of the doctor medical duties rather than just nursing medical duties. But the point being is, they were people like Father McKay, Radar were a lot more competent in that episode than in this episode. But that's because the episodes are very different. I think the episode was called Crisis, by the way. That episode was essentially about them doing what they can to keep treating patients. We're down, but we still gotta do what we need to do to treat the wounded. Here, that's not the point of the episode. The point of the episode is, oh look, the nurses are not in the camp anymore, and how are the men going to deal with that? Therefore, incompetence is going to be the plot points that are going to be emphasized regarding the men of the camp. For the women, things are not going to get done. That's essentially what the episode is somewhat saying in that regard. And it also made me think of an episode that's going to be in a later season where there's a male nurse who's not recognized because he's a man, not a woman, being a nurse. Therefore, he does not get the commission that he should have being a trained nurse. And that's another episode that's going to be really interesting to discuss. But the reason why I'm bringing it up here is because basically this episode is saying doctors know what they can do, but all the other men, nope, they don't know anything about being nurses, which is kind of contradicted in that future episode. And it does make sense in this episode because Radar, Farr, McKay, Kalingo, they're not trained in medical stuff. As long as they can say, yep, that's bleeding, he needs to see a doctor, that's all they need to know, and maybe how to put a band-aid on. They don't need to know regularly, they don't need to know what tools to hand a doctor during surgery. They normally don't need to do that. So this episode does kind of rely on the stereotype, if you will, though sometimes I do wonder if it's true that when women are gone, men mess up. But I bring all that up because I want to mention it because this episode does rely on the stereotype that women are competent and men are incompetent. Not totally, of course, but that stereotype is an undertone in this episode. And that's actually a very common stereotype. Or actually, I should phrase it more accurately. The stereotype is that men are only competent when women are present. There's also that stereotype too. There's also some other, sexism and all that in this episode regarding, hanging out with the nurses, which is a very common thing in early MASH, and part of Hawkeye's character is to be that womanizer. There's also making fun of Frank too, which is easy to do. He is very much the punching bag of MASH. So we get to see Frank's wedding videos, and that scene where they're showing it, it's just Radar, Klinger, Hawkeye Chopper, and Henry watching it, but it's probably where most of the laugh track is in this episode. They're making basically Frank be the main humor of the episode while the nurses being gone are not treated as humorous, it's treated as more of a tragedy. But going back to Frank, part of his wedding photo video has to do with him and his newlywed wife are about to, they're leaving the ceremony in the car, and she gets into the driver's seat, and Frank doesn't want to. They're laughing over that. Now, that does kind of rely on a sexist stereotype that the man is supposed to be driving and women aren't the good drivers. But what truly makes that funny is because of how that is followed up on later in the episode. So after the enemy attack comes, which is really just 5 o'clock Charlie, which I really love that they called back to 5 o'clock Charlie. And the minute they knew it's him, they knew like, oh, yep, this is gonna be fine. There's no real threat. The nurses are returned, and of course everyone's greeting the nurses. No, they're greeting the nurses, kisses and all that. And Margaret and Frank goes greet each other and head over to a Jeep. Hawkeye notices and gets Trapper's attention, and the exact same scene plays out between Frank and Margaret that played out between Frank and his wife. I think it's Lorraine. I can't remember that. I should go look it up, but I won't. And it's the exact same scene. Margaret gets into the driver's seat and Frank has to walk around to the passenger seat. Exactly the same. Almost the same. Slight framing differences, but practically the same. And that makes that scene earlier with Frank's wedding photos regarding that moment truly funny. If it was just, haha, Frank ended up having to be the passenger instead of the driver, I don't think it would have worked for me. But the fact that they followed it up with the same thing happening again with Margaret makes it funny because it's more about Frank rather than about the woman in Frank's life, whether that be his actual wife or Margaret, who he's having an affair with. And that makes the joke very different. It makes it work better because it's based off of a character, a caricature, if you will, rather than a stereotype. Yes, the stereotype does play a role in it, but let's say we saw the exact same thing but with Colonel Potter instead. It wouldn't have been funny because one doesn't fit Colonel Potter's character. If Colonel Potter saw Mrs. Potter get into the driver's seat, I think he would just go right on into the passenger seat and wouldn't try to indicate that he wants to drive. That just seems more like his character, like he'd be much more willing to go with the flow in that regard. I don't know for sure, but what I'm getting at is that joke works because it's Frank being the joke works because it's Frank, not because women driving. Which contrasts nicely with the joke from the previous episode, Alcoholics Anonymous, where Trapper made a joke about his wife not being a good driver. And the joke was, haha, women can't drive. There was no insight into anything else, so it felt shallow, for lack of a better term, relying too much on stereotypes. But this time, it doesn't, because one implies that it subverts that stereotype, because it implies that in both cases, Margaret and then Frank's actual wife are the better drivers. But it also works because it's making fun of Frank, who in MASH is easy to make fun of because he, lacks a lot of redeeming qualities. And in other words, it's easy to make fun of characters who don't have a redeeming part of themselves. For example, let's say, they had instead of written Frank that, he was a goofball, buffoon and that, but he was truly well-meaning. I don't know if the jokes would have worked, especially mean-spirited jokes. That's a speculation there, but how you write the character who's the butt of the joke in comedy will affect how jokes are received. A character who you're sympathetic with, you're going to have to write a joke different than a character you're not sympathetic with. Frank is being that unsympathetic character who you're writing jokes about, going to be very different than writing jokes about other characters. There's other things I want to say. This is the second appearance of Captain Spaulding, who is dubbed the Singing Doctor. He first appeared in Rainbow Bridge and he didn't interact with any characters. He appeared in this episode. He actually did get some interactions. And I believe we actually see him performing surgery because he's supposed to be a doctor. And then we get one more episode later on in the season where he appears as well. But apparently, from what I can gather online, the people behind the scenes were not a big fan of having such a gimmicky character, i.e. a doctor who sings. So I actually like it. One, I like the folksy, bluesy music. That's definitely in my repertoire. I just like that style of sound. But I also think it works because music has been a big part of the military since forever. The closest we get normally in MASH is every now and then they'll play music over the loudspeaker. There's actually a whole episode where Radar acts as a DJ, so that's after Colonel Potter arrives. But the point being is that music is a big thing, a big way people in the military historically, I don't know about current day, but historically have passed the time. Marching songs and that. I remember there's an episode, I think this was after Charles. Actually, we got a lot more music when Charles came, because he liked classical music. But there's also an episode where Father McKay realizes there's no really war songs about Korea and decides to write his own song. And what I liked about Captain Spaulding, despite his limited appearances, is it brought that musical component in. If you just to provide some context why I think it's actually really important for the historical context of the Korean War for MASH to have music and have characters singing and writing their own music is, if you don't know, I studied history in college and I wrote my senior thesis on Civil War music. Mostly it's used to convey messages and all that and to support the Union cause. But part of that, I did do research outside of my narrow topic because, you gotta get context in that. And the thing is, music has always been a big part of keeping morale up for soldiers. John Brown's Body started as a song and it kind of merged together the historical person known as John Brown, and apparently there was a sergeant also named John Brown, and the song seemed like it started because the men in his unit drew that comparison and made a song making fun of that, and then eventually got adapted by a poet. The melody adapted the song to become the Battle Hymn of the Republic. There's like a through connection there from what soldiers did to have some fun, all the way to a beautiful song. And I kind of wish MASH did more with that. Having a doctor who played the guitar and sings, I think would have been a great additional historical context. I don't know how many people like that were in the Korean War in reality, but it would still be, I think, authentic to the experiences that soldiers generally have. There's an episode of Band of Brothers where, I'm trying to remember, I wish I remember which episode it was, but basically, the episode opens with him listening to basically some German civilians play some violin music among the rubble, and the rest of the episode is basically the events leading up to that, and then the episode returns to the present, and then the violinist finishes up. But it's like this moment it's written to be this moment of reflection for the characters in Band of Brothers, and they put that to music. That shows music is important in not only helping telling a story, but in the lives of soldiers. So there's more I could say on that topic, but I just wanted to bring this up because with how Captain Spaulding actually had a role in this episode, a minor role, mind you, not really a big play. This episode could have without him, but I wanted to add that additional historical context to show that his character, despite being a gimmick, could have actually been very beneficial in telling the stories that MASH wanted to tell, and a big part of MASH is actually how people deal with war. Whether that was intentional or not has been a big part of it, and music has been a way we have dealt with war for a long, long time. So that's where I'm going to end my review. I would love to hear your thoughts on the episode There's Nothing Like a Nurse in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the force be with you, always.